first speaker tonight will be Russel Danao-Schroeder, who is a senior housing planner with Arlington County Department of Community Planning, Housing, and Development.
Just wanted to ask you all a few questions, get to know about you all a little bit. So how many of you have lived in Arlington your whole life? A few of you. So from that, I'm assuming that most of you moved here from somewhere else. So how many of you are homeowners? Okay, that's interesting. How many of you have rented or rented when you first came to Arlington? Very interesting. So if you were to move to Arlington now, would you be able to afford the house that you currently live in? No. Okay. So this is important. I mean, this is really part of why we need to look at housing and housing affordability in the county. I mean, times have changed, the economy has changed, and the demographics of the county have changed. So Arlington County's vision, the vision for this county, is that Arlington will be a diverse and inclusive world-class urban community with secure, attractive residential and commercial neighborhoods where people unite to form a caring, learning, participating, and sustainable community in which each person is valued. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with this or have heard this before, but this is the stated vision of Arlington County government. And so if becoming or being a world-class, diverse and inclusive community means that we have a diversity of people, which means that people of a diversity of incomes as well as a diversity of backgrounds can live here. And a key way of being able to achieve that is through affordable housing. Without housing that's affordable at all levels of the income spectrum, we stop being a diverse community. And you know, my job as an Arlington County staffer is to fulfill this vision through the work that I do on behalf of you all. So the study has three areas of focus. First was to quantify the need, look at what the actual demographics are telling us about housing need, to look at our programs, take a step back and assess them and see if they're meeting those needs, and to finally to kind of lay out what our affordable housing policy should be given what the needs of the community are. So some findings from the study. Rents have risen dramatically. This is from 2004 to 2012. At the same time, the average salaries have more or less tracked with this. So you could say, hey, that's not so bad. Salaries are going along with it. But if we look at particular industries within the economy, the hospitality and food services and retail trade, for example, there are others, but we see that these, which are typically lower wage earning jobs, that they've become stagnant. The wages have stagnated since about 2007, creating a growing gap between the rent inflation and actual wages. Now, this is the wonky number slide. But when we think about affordable housing and the areas where the county has historically intervened in providing affordable housing, we're looking at households that are at 60% of the area median income. Area median means half earn more, half earn less. In Arlington County, more than half earn more than the median, because we're looking at the median for the region, because we're part of a regional economy. So for a household of one person, that's $45,000. If you remember the income that we were looking at for the hospitality industry, the annual wage for that would be about $29,000. So if you're a single person and you're in the hospitality industry, you're earning well below what the 60% threshold is. Even if you're two people, you are earning well below what the threshold is. So what's happened in the county since 2000, our affordable housing stock we classify into two different camps. Marks, which are probably when many of you came to Arlington, you rented apartments that were affordable, and they were affordable because that's just the market condition that was. And those, we've seen a dramatic decline since 2000. Well, we've had, the kind of barely silver lining is our committed affordable housing units, which the county has helped to produce, have been on a steady increase. But the overall effect of this has been in the last, or since 2000, that we've lost 11,000 units of housing that used to be affordable to people at incomes below 60% of the area median income. So looking at the community as a whole, there's 107,400 households in the community, renters and owners. Of those, slightly more than half are renter households. Of those renter households, about a third of them, or 30%, are in this area that's been our primary area of interest, the households below 60% of area median income, which is about 16% of the overall households. The actual stock that's available in the community for those is far less than the number of households, which means that the people are paying a lot more. There's a high number of people paying up to more than half of their income in rent. And of committed affordable housing, which is the only housing that we have a guarantee that will be affordable into the future, it covers a smaller portion of that. On the ownership side, and there's some numbers over there, condos since 2000 up 172%, townhomes 163%, single family detached an increase of 146%. Now, we all know that the nation had a housing bubble burst in the mid-2000s, and Arlington didn't suffer too badly from that. A little bit, you see something in the single family attaches up and a down there, but it wasn't nearly as bad as our neighbors around us. As part of the study, we asked or tasked our consultants with creating forecasts of the future, and we worked with George Mason Center for Regional Analysis to put these together based on employment projections for the area. So not looking at land use or anything, but what's the projected employment, and how do those jobs relate to incomes to know about the types of households we'll have. So by 2040, we'll have added another 30,000 households to Arlington County. Of those, 6,300 are anticipated to be renter households with incomes below 60% of AMI. The other kind of dramatic increase in demographics is that households headed by persons over 65 is anticipated to increase by 75%, which is, if households in general are increasing by 30%, the baby boom population, this wave is coming on us and has dramatic implications for housing in the community. So, back to the study. What we've proposed in our outline is three goals to address affordable housing. The first, that we must have an adequate supply of housing to meet the needs of the community, and it's this community's needs through both rental and ownership strategies. Secondly, a lot of the housing we produce doesn't reach families at much lower income levels. So those households below 60%, half of them actually have incomes below 30% of the area median income and are extremely low income. And so the county has some mechanisms and programs to allow people to access housing who are extremely, face extreme challenges in housing. And lastly, that our efforts need to be sustainable in the community. Arlington's been at the forefront in pushing for greater lengths of affordability in their housing, which means that we're going to have the affordable housing that we have for a much longer time that it's going to be around. And this is a good thing. But we also need to be sure that it contributes to the overall sustainability of the community, that it's tied in with our transit networks, that it's as green as possible, that it's not detrimental to the environment. So coming up, we're anticipating a county board work session to look into this study in February 2015. We'll be out widely in the community during the spring to talk about this, to let everybody know every detail. This is a really quick overview tonight, and we'll be going to the commissions in the county: Planning Commission, Housing Commission, Disability Advisory Commission, you name it, we'll be there. And to come back to the county board in June 2015 for them to take action on this proposed affordable housing plan. I think I've reached the end of my time, and so I'll give the mic back to Carl.
Our next speaker will be Mary Rouleau, who is the Executive Director of the Alliance for Housing Solutions.
Thank you. It's good to be back. What I'm going to do in my 10 minutes is kind of cherry pick some of the information that Russell gave you and throw a few other things out there for you. It's a big topic, so we won't do it justice, and maybe we'll do more in Q&A. So, riffing back on what Russell said, what he said, is it values and or is it enlightened self-interest that these are some of our goals? I think it's both. So let's turn the question for tonight: who can afford to live in Arlington on its head, and say, who can we afford to have not live in Arlington? To me, that's really the issue. As Russell said, our region is wealthy. We are wealthier in Arlington, okay? Now, if you look at the upper right quadrant, those three pieces of, pie, I hope, that's about 20% of our population, households making 60% and below. And that's where most of our program dollars, whether they be Arlington or federal, are targeted. I want to say to you tonight, while that is the appropriate major target, households at the 60 to 80% level, indeed probably households even above that, are starting to struggle as well. This is a really, I hope you can see this. This is the slide that set me back on my heels when I looked at it. These are the difference between 2000 and 2010. The last three bar graph groupings to your right are basically that left side of the pie I just showed you. You can see very clearly where our growth is coming. Okay, we have a big growth in high-income households, which is good news in some ways, but that has a direct impact on housing prices. It drives a lot. I also want to be clear about something. While it is our rent that is disproportionate to national averages, if you're a family in Arlington who needs child care, look at that. Okay? So it's not just rent. Rent is the foundation, literally and figuratively, of affordability. But we have some other challenges as well, folks, that are disproportionate to national averages. Here's some good news, and I just totally ripped this slide off from Arlington County. This was part of the work that they've done, and Russell has presented at others, talks I've been to. We have good public support to help a lot of types of folks. Our workforce, seniors come up number one. Homeless people. We want a diverse community by race, occupation, etc. So I continue to maintain that our value set is there. What is missing often is the information to help people support the hard choices we have to make. Okay? So my organization, AHS, and others often hear, oh, density, it's like a bad word. We need to change the narrative on that. Because what density has created in this county for the last 30, 40 years are what we call great spaces. Yeah, we're ripping off some other people's acronyms, but we're calling them great spaces. And this is what great spaces bring. I live in Clarendon. That's a great space, okay? What it brings, now for me, front and center is the housing of varied size and prices. But see what's at the top of our, what's that, a hexagon or something? It's economic and job vitality. And you all know that we're kind of challenged right now in Arlington, both regionally and nationally. So here's a couple of headlines. Yes, I cherry picked them, but we are losing jobs in this region to other parts of the country that are more affordable. And while we have a highly educated workforce, we're not the only place in the country that has educated workers. So we are facing a challenge I would respectfully submit, both in the region, because a lot of other jurisdictions have caught up and figured out what we did, and now they're doing it themselves. But this region faces a challenge from other parts of the country. Now, being a good daughter of the Midwest, if all those jobs go to Detroit, I'm not going to complain, all right? I'm putting that out there. So who lives right now in our committed affordable units? This was some work that Russell's colleagues did in October of 2013. The big blue one is restaurant, retail, construction, hotel. A lot of our vital industries, we get a lot of dollars, through entertainment and hotels. Those workers need assistance with their rent. Who else might be challenged? And who often we don't talk about that much, but I think we need to start talking about them more. That's our good old Generation Y, the millennials, right? They move here if they're not living here. A lot of the kids who grew up here can't live here anymore because they can't afford it. That's another conversation. They move here for their jobs. For them, a livable city, county, is hip, fun. Arlington's that, but we're also expensive, and that's not a good thing. In some work that Arlington Economic Development did, they hired a survey. That's a big survey. I'm cherry picking some of the stuff. But basically, the biggest gap is affordability of housing for this generation. They like it here, but they don't see themselves living here downstream because of the affordability issue. These are young kids, by the way, that are the ones that go out when they do the homeless count overnight. I worked at one of them by serving coffee one night. That's all yours truly put in. It was those young kids that rolled in night after night, went out and did that counting, by and large. They do a lot of good volunteer work in this community. I would hate to see a lot of these kids peel out of here because they can't afford it. But another group, seniors, and as Russell said, there's going to be a big uptick in senior households. We need to rethink even single-family neighborhoods and what we can do to help people live there. And yes, build some attractive density. If you look at this, it's like a block, maybe a little part of a block in a neighborhood, but you see, bedrooms over garages and small little spaces. You can create great-looking spaces even in our single-family neighborhoods that will drive a different type of density. Accessory dwelling units. Now, I know we went around on this 8 or 9 years ago. We need to go back to this, respectfully. We need to go back to this. There are seniors who want to stay in their communities. They want to age in their communities, but either their house is too big and or too expensive. But with the kind of dwelling ordinance that we have right now, very few have been built. We can have some very creative designs if we have the political will to create the regulation to allow them to happen. And still have good-looking single-family neighborhoods. We have to think broader about connections. My organization did a whole forum afternoon on seniors aging in place back in September, a couple months ago. All of our stuff is on our website, all the great presentations. But one of the things is, we often don't put, and I'm a boomer. I'm in the middle of the boom. So in some definitions, like Denny's and AARP, of course, I'm a senior. So I'm going to put myself in this. Do we think about seniors when we think about smart growth? Probably not. But we should be in here because what's good for a lot of us, especially as we age, is also good for families with kids, for example. The ability to walk around safely. One really positive thing that we are doing and we are seeing impacts is on our homeless population. We have a 10-year plan to end homelessness. We have a 100 Homes campaign that's part of a state campaign, it's part of a national campaign. And Arlington, quite frankly, has been doing pretty well. That count I was talking to you about last year, we are seeing reductions in the number of homeless. Some of the methodology has changed a bit, so as I put in here in the interest of full disclosure, not sure that all these numbers are like one for what they used to be, but Arlington has taken a very deliberative and aggressive and successful approach to reducing homelessness. Now that is quite frankly a relatively small but incredibly challenging part of the population that needs housing. But the point is this, we are making progress, and if we put our mind to it and we have the political will and the compassion, there are other parts of our housing need gap I am convinced we can fill. And I'm ahead of schedule. Thank you.
Our third speaker will be Andrew McIntyre. He's a Senior Vice President for Development and Construction in Penzance Corporation.
So good evening. Thank you very much for having me here. I have to admit, I think hopefully this is the beginning of a very important conversation that helps us address this incredibly important issue. I am not an affordable housing expert focused on real estate development. I want to share a little bit of insight that we have in our world as it relates to some of the information that was already shared to you or shared with you this evening. I love the Arlington County mission statement to create a diverse and inclusive world-class urban environment. If you look at where the population is focused and where it has grown in Arlington, it has been a result of our metro corridor that extends from Roslyn through to Clarendon Courthouse and Ballston and Virginia Square, and we all appreciate the density that's come with it. There have been positives, negatives, and as a community, we spend a lot of time talking about these issues when we go through the site plan review process, when we go through area plan updates. And I think that overall there's a term out there most people have heard called the Arlington Way. And I think it's a very inclusive way to make sure everybody is heard, but also helps us understand how we address all the different wants and needs that we would have with very few resources of money and space and competing interests. So with respect to these great urban environments, as a developer, we really do believe that you have to have the diversity. That is, for every report I've ever read on what makes a great urban place, one of the criteria that are continually mentioned. And diversity of income is very important. We've seen the shift, and that shift has come because of the urbanization. Urbanization is probably going to be our economic engine going forward. And I know that a lot of people may think about that and say, well, that doesn't make sense. The federal, everybody knows all the federal jobs that we've lost over the last several years. And there's a story there that I think people are missing when it comes to DC, Arlington, and this market. 10, 15 years ago, if we lost all the government jobs that we recently have shed, the contractors as well as the government employees, what you would see is a ghost town. But the reason we don't have that is because of the infrastructure investment that was made and to create density around alternative ways of moving around. And you have a younger generation that has shed their desire to have automobiles. So we look at the amount of people that need to be in a car, and they have these transportation options. They get down on the ground plane. They do want to be in safe neighborhoods. They can go out the door, go to the grocery store, they can meet with friends, they can go to work, they can bike share. Over the last 10 years, we've seen massive amounts of development, and that has resulted in fewer car trips in Arlington. Arlington, you can move through Arlington. Once you come across Key Bridge, you come across Key Bridge, and you can move pretty. I came through Georgetown traffic tonight. I couldn't get out of it fast enough. But my point is that urbanization, that drive that brings people here is something that our two demographics, the young folks and our empty nesters, are the demographic that we see, because we focus on big developments around metro centers as a commercial developer in my past 10 years working in Arlington. I promise I'm going to bring us back around to affordable housing, because I know you're looking at me like, what is this, a commercial for development? But when we go through the site plan process, we do have an affordable component. And we think that the mission of the affordable housing groups like APA, AHC, the county, Mary's group here tonight, is so vitally important. And as part of that, we have proffers in the form of either negotiated units that are included within our developments, or money that goes into a fund that Arlington uses to provide solutions and assistance for the programs that would bring affordable units into the city, into the county. Where I think that we might want to focus some of our efforts, because the affordability issue is not just a function of the 60 or 80% AMI. Mary hit the nail on the head. I was at Lyon Hall at a house party with two young professionals that both made six figures. They were a couple in their late 20s, early 30s, and they were talking about buying a home. And they said, well, we can't live in Arlington. We can't afford it. And they shared an apartment in Lyon Hall. They've got to go someplace else. So my point is that as developers, we put these business plans into place, and our investors are going to take a certain level of return, and we have costs that have to go into these projects, and we need to figure out how to reduce costs. And the reason that we should reduce the cost is to keep all the affordability down and to put those dollars into other things like the affordable that we should be focused on. Making that more affordable is going to continue driving that urban engine with large developments. Now, some of the costs we've already talked about in some of the forums. We're meeting with the county now. How do we get away from building so much parking? We're not talking about getting away from the affordable proffer. We think that that's great. But the amount of money that we spend on parking when we don't need it for units that, where instead of a 0.8, 0.9 is sufficient, we're overbuilding parking at $50,000 a space, $35,000 to $50,000. It's very accretive. And what happens is that drives up the cost. That makes it more expensive for the empty nesters and for the rest of the folks. With respect to how we use those resources, when we sit down with the county, we sit down with different organizations, we talk about what makes sense building that on-site, or if we were to put the units or the money into units that could fund those off-site organizations. Those off-site organizations can create affordable housing at a lot more efficient rate than what we can because of some of the zoning that works to their favor, the parking requirements, but there's a different demographic. Most of the demographic for our affordables are going to need 2 to 3 bedrooms, where the empty nesters, the young millennials coming in, those demographics are more of the studios, the micro units, the 1 bedrooms, the 1 bedroom plus a den. There are 2 bedrooms as well, but these are families. These are families that need different resources, and there are different financing structures available to these affordable organizations. APA does a great job in putting these units into production, and they do it interspersed with the rest of the developments that we have going on in the county. I think overall the start of this discussion is going to begin with the study that the county is about to put out. We're part of the conversation, part of the community. We want to be a partner with everybody and figure out how we can kind of push back on the lack of affordability for everyone here in Arlington. And that's it.
Thank you, Andrew. Now we come to the part of the evening that we're all looking forward to, the Q&A session. Peter, up front. This is the first hand I saw.
My name is Peter Fallon. My question is, arguably the way in which the county creates new affordable units is through the site plan process, whereby either there are set-aside units within the building or a financial contribution to the county's investment fund. There has been talk recently, given changes in the county, about possibly redirecting some community benefits to other types of needs, such as schools. And I think that's a very healthy discussion to have. But if these benefits are redirected, are there any thoughts about how we make up for the shortfall, or are we essentially, is it a one-off? Are we losing something?
From the housing perspective, obviously we don't want to lose what we have enshrined in the zoning ordinance as far as the contribution on site of units or in lieu fees in cash. It's going to be a difficult thing to work through. But as it is currently, we get a fair amount of the AHIF proceeds come from developer contributions, and those contributions actually yield a greater amount of affordable units than they would if they were built on site. Roughly, we get a yield of 3.2 units over 1 unit that could be on site. So it's a very important mechanism for contributing to our affordable stock.
Well, I'll say as an advocate that I think you're right, Peter. It's a question that needs to be asked and developed and explored, and what are the trade-offs here? Right now, as you all know, we're in a crisis to find seats for students, and I think while it's not a bad question to ask, as in theory, we're certainly being driven by boots on the ground. That crisis may abate, there may be less of a push for that, but yeah, let's have the discussion, but let's have it fully and realize what the trade-offs are. Because the reality is, to create units affordable for households 60% and below, there is no way you can do that in the market. Straight up, you can't do it. So if we don't have X number of dollars in our AHIF and our other tools, we are not going to be able to house those families. So, it is a very, very tough question, and I know other jurisdictions have looked at it. I think the other thing we can think about doing, quite frankly, a better job at is making sure we are really looking at school impacts when we're doing our site plans. Can we be smarter? And I'm not sure we can. Folks, we don't have any easy choices in Arlington. Let's just make sure we're all, it's like a stipulation. No easy choices. Lack of land. Land's expensive. You cannot run from that. And, quite frankly, the Dillon rule. We can't run from those. That's our reality. But I still think we have some room to do a better job at doing our land use planning when we look at schools and citing not just of affordable housing, by the way, because contrary to a lot of popular opinion, a lot of our single-family neighborhoods is what's driving our boom in the schools. So we have to look county-wide. But yeah, we should be making sure we're looking at schools when we're addressing sector plans. And even I would submit as a housing advocate, and I'm a teacher, so, I love my students, but you have to look at that stuff, and I think we need to be more intentional about that.
So I would agree with Mary's comment with respect to where we look. I think that it's not just the schools. I think there are funding issues across the board for the county right now. I'm a member of the West Roslyn Area Plan Study, and so we're wrestling with not just the location, but what are the costs in trying to redevelop that site as a public-private partnership, so to speak, where we consider the location of schools, the operations of the school, as well as the firehouse and its location, its operation, but also more importantly, its cost, because there are certain firehouse locations that will cost us a lot more when we don't have money for it, and we need to consider everything. I think that there's also the evaluation of what that means when we talk about taking from one to give to the other. We haven't really solved the problem for affordable housing. We've just reduced the resources that are available. I think, as I understand it, the conversation is, hey, other jurisdictions have figured out as part of their development process how they evaluate the impact on the school system, and that is accounted for with respect to the development, with the development site plan. I think that's closer to what you're referring to, if I'm correct. And I think that the impacts on schools may be larger from our affordable housing, because they're creating family-sized units where most of the demographic that we're building to, we recently submitted a site plan application to our very first submission to county staff for the redevelopment of the carpool site. And as we look at our demographics with our property management company and want to understand who will rent here, there within the quarter mile around that site, only 4% of the folks had children, school-age children. Most of the people that were renters, 50% fell into the millennials, and they didn't have children. And then the rest of the major demographic, excuse me, I apologize. Yeah, 50% millennials, and then like in the 30% for empty nesters. And so most of the people we expect that would be there would not be families. So I'm not saying that there isn't a conversation that needs to be had that talks about how do we fund through all the different available means. It's just we need to be thoughtful about where we put those costs and whether or not those are the appropriate places to put costs. But I think that, sorry for the long-winded response, but back to Mary's point, I think that it's all of the different things budget-wise, and besides just the site plan process, how can the county, and hopefully we'll be successful at West Roslyn, how can we look at other opportunities to be able to take advantage of cost savings and revenue generation for the county from the commercial real estate perspective?
Hi, Joe Holy. I'd like to ask all three people to respond to the following question. How can we keep Arlington the Arlington we love, which wants to be diverse, sustainable, etc., affordable to people below 60% of median, quote, affordable housing, affordable to people below 120% of median, quote, workforce housing? How can we keep Arlington the kind of community we have with all the beautiful things in the context of a recent election that focused on taking away everything except core services, cutting taxes, will we have the community that we love, or will it be quite different if this other team is able to prevail?
I'm not going to talk about it in terms of teams, but I'm going to put some ideas out there, mostly focused on housing, because it's such a driver. The first thing is, going back to what I said, without government assistance, whether it's federal tax credits or the AHIF bonus density, something that the county produces, it is impossible to serve households at 60% and below in most instances. So we have to keep doing a critical mass of that. To serve the people above that population, the so-called workforce housing, including some of these Gen Yers who are, as you know, a very desired employee demographic for a lot of employers. You know, Arlington was rated #1 at tech-friendly for young people, #1 in the country. We have really good buzz here. My fear is we're going to lose it because these kids are going to start going somewhere else. I call them kids, but you know. But my thing has been, when I'm out talking, is let's make sure the county does whatever it can do. And I'm not talking about spending dollars here. I'm talking about zoning, codes, to help Andrew and his colleagues serve that next higher up demographic, if you will. In other words, what can the private market, how can the private market help to fill this gap? They're not going to fill it at the lower ends of income. Remember that pie chart I put up? That's 20% of the population. There's those other pieces that were on the right side of the pie that need to be addressed. When Andrew talked about parking, he wasn't out there alone. My organization did a whole seminar in September of 2013. We brought an expert in from Cornell to talk, and Walter Tejada spoke at it, to talk about parking and underground utilities. I am convinced, I say this on behalf of myself, not necessarily my board. I have half a dozen board members here, and they can shout me down if they want. I am convinced we can do more to help drive down the cost in the market if we are willing to step up and take on some of these issues as a community. So we need to, we need to do that. I think the other thing we have to think about, folks, is the importance of housing in some of these decisions we're making to our economic development. You know, we had a story here in Arlington that precedes I moved here in '86, way before my time, and that was the story of the siting of the Metro and the controversy over that. And it got cited, the Orange Line, where it did, as you all know, in particular the Orange Line. And that has driven a lot of our standard of living. It's driven our capacity, really, to provide a lot of programs, including safety net programs that I care about. But a lot of people have moved to Arlington. I mean, I'm kind of one of the old timers now in Arlington, really, in '86, right? I'm often in the room and I'm one of the older people in Arlington. So there's a lot of people who have moved in who don't really know the history, that there were these hard choices made and the community stepped up. And I think we lose that narrative at our own risk. And that don't know, for example, that 50% of our revenue is generated in the commercial side. Okay? That's a big number. That allows us to do things as a social services advocate, on the social service side, I would submit, and housing. So this is, I think, part of the story we have to tell and retell, that we are now challenged in economic development in a way that I would argue we haven't been in at least 20 years, and maybe it's more than that. And that we have to look again at maybe making some tough choices and look big, think big picture in a very competitive environment.
Continuing on that, if you remember the slide I showed you with the lines going predominantly down, in the future, it doesn't take much to imagine where that line ends up in 5 years, 6 years. By 2020, it's likely that we won't have any affordable housing that's affordable that's being offered by the private market. So the county needs to be committed to continuing their support of affordable housing if we are to remain a diverse community. I mean, you saw what the committed affordable housing only can serve a portion of the households that actually need housing. And if we're losing the private market and we're also growing at the same time, if we're to stay diverse, it requires a substantial commitment from the county. Now, the county produces affordable housing through financing with their partners, but we also get affordable housing through the development process, and particularly the bonus density and revisiting the bonus density and looking at the caps on the bonus density so we're able to get more units on site, and other land use tools where we can pursue getting affordability through the private development that's taking place in the county is critical, because it's something that the county can achieve affordable housing without an expenditure per se.
So I would echo Russell and Mary's sentiments. I think in a large part, to answer your question, philosophically, I mean, the only constant in the universe is change. I mean, we're constantly in a state of change, and we're going through a tremendously aggressive period of change in Arlington. I think that the federal government, the reliance on the federal government, the rise of the millennials, and the reason I think that is so important to Arlington long term is this is intellectual capital that is accumulated on our doorstep. And Mary's absolutely right. If we don't figure out a way to not just keep them, but to keep attracting that intellectual capital, the business cycle isn't going to come back in our direction. I'm not saying that like it's going to happen tomorrow or in the next 2 or 3 years. I think that Arlington right now, rightfully a function of a lot of the hard decisions that were made previously that Mary talked about, has put us in this position that we top the list nationwide on any number of categories. And there are positive categories, places that people want to live and the income levels and the rest. And I also agree with Mary is that we're tremendously wealthy here. We're wealthier than the rest of the areas in a very wealthy region. So I think that the answer to your question is really a function of this type of dialogue, open-mindedness. When Jay Facette talked with us at RAPS and kicked things off, he started by saying, everybody's not going to get everything that they want. And if we all just take our individual blocks and go home, and that's what we're going to work with, then we're not going to end up with the best possible results. So by being open to things that we may not have done before, and not just stop in our tracks and say, nope, this is the way it has to be, but being open-minded, having this type of civil discourse, and making sure that we talk more and that we are open-minded more, and to things we may have never considered. Nobody ever thought of a metro 20, 30 years ago. So.
Yes, Catherine Scruggs. I'm glad to hear the emphasis from Mary about the millennials, but there's another group that I want to make sure that we can emphasize as well, or groups. I think I certainly believe so much in the programs that we have for people at 60% AMI, and we know we have to reach lower than that because there are those numbers. But in that same pie chart of where do the percentage, the salaries, what percent of the people here, that 29%, a greater group, makes less than 120% of AMI. So to go from 60 to 120% AMI, these are probably an awful lot of teachers, policemen, firefighters, small business owners, and we don't have any programs right now that are helping them. And yet to have a healthy economy, we need...
Is there a question in there someplace?
Yes. What is it that we need to do, and what do we need to say in the affordable housing study that says we need to target that middle group, the workforce that Joe Holy. So yes, tell me, what is it that works, and particularly for the economy?
Thank you, Catherine. And I'd like to recognize Catherine as a member of the Affordable Housing Study Working Group, and also Linda Kelleher, who's here. Yes, this group from 80 to 120, which the other gentleman referred to as the workforce. And there's two components of that. I think in all these, even up to 150, 200, there's renters and there's people who own homes as well. And so in the 80 to 120, we do have, that's an area where the private market has very well served those on the rental side. On the ownership side, looking at the analysis of housing sales over the last year, 32% of the homes sold were affordable to those. Now, those are all condominiums. They're not single-family homes. And furthermore, where it's probably more critical is they're not three bedrooms. You know? So if you're looking at the 80 to 120% families that require a three-bedroom home, that's a particularly difficult nut to crack. But on the home ownership side, I think we need to be looking at creative ways through incentivizing more affordable production by the private sector that can meet that need.
I'm just going to add a brief comment here about the 80% AMI, because I don't want people to not leave here understanding that we do have actually some committed affordables that go up to 80% of AMI. In particular, this vision was built into the Columbia Pike Neighborhoods Plan that was adopted a couple of years ago on the west end of the Pike. And an opportunity arose in the summer, I think it was, or spring, I don't remember anymore, for AHC, one of our major nonprofit developers, to buy an existing property called the Serrano on the west end of the Pike. Now those units were in the market, but they were still affordable up to about 80%. But the opportunity, and the staff and the board supported this, and AHS also supported this, was that we were able to essentially, AHC was able to buy that building, if you will, and kind of freeze it there. Because why? Rent is becoming unaffordable because rents are climbing. So even if it's affordable to 80% today in the Serrano, there's no guarantee in 2 years it would be the same. And there were several hundred units involved. And what happened is AHC, and I don't know the numbers specifically, but or in particular, but they came in and they basically froze it and said, we're going to drive down some of those rents to people, to households making 60%. We're going to keep the lion's share at 80% for 60 years. So this is, I'll be way gone by the time this expires. I'll have to account for it at the other end. Yay. And then at the top, they're going to have a few that are totally in the marketplace. So they can kind of do an internal cross-subsidy, if you will. So the county does look for opportunities to do that, recognizing that the lion's share of our help needs to be driven to the lower AMI levels. Depending on what rolls out with the study and our demographics, who knows? We may, as a community, decide to do more of that.
Thank you. You have a question? You pick it.
My name is John Quinn. The question is for the county staff person and for the developer. Have each of you conducted a study with respect to the value of bonus density? And if you have conducted such a study, I'd like to know what the results show. What is the real value to the county and to the developer of the bonus density per unit that's being awarded in that program?
We haven't, as part of this study, looked into the quantifying what that value is. But as we look at recommending that we remove the 25% cap on bonus density, we would obviously be looking very closely at what the economics of that are in order to be able to come up with something that is economically sensible.
So, from a development perspective, it's going to be a project-by-project basis. That 25%, if it really moved the needle between going or not, you probably have bigger issues with the project pro forma or the business plan. The major issue here is that there are a lot of risks when you deal with development, and those risks span several years from the time that you initially buy a piece of property, assemble whatever else you need to do, go through the zoning process, the design process, the construction process, deliver the units, and see if you actually realize the rents. and investors and developers look to hedge their risks. And so that's why, with respect to density that fits within the envelope, it is a currency for the county. And I think that the value is probably more accretive to the county and to the community in the efforts to address affordable housing than it really is on the development side, from a go or no-go perspective. But sometimes it's obviously there and it's helpful, and we utilize it. But it is just to help us improve along the margins, so to speak.
Do we have a question on this side of the room? Charlie.
Yeah, Charlie Clark. I wanted to switch a little bit to the subject of 3 or 4 bedroom middle class housing. You mentioned that. What are the incentives that can be changed, if any, for home builders who want to tear down a lot of the $400,000 and $500,000 homes that were built in the late 40s and early 50s, and replace them with $1.3 million McMansions that cover the whole lot? Because this is also what's making homeownership unaffordable for a lot of the middle class people.
I'm glad you asked. So I think one of the things that we've been discussing is looking at what types of alternatives might be viable in single-family neighborhoods. And as you mentioned, you see teardowns, you see 1.3 million houses going up where more modest homes were before. And I think if we look at the design of homes, many of those homes, they could be 5,000 square feet, which is certainly sufficient to have 2 homes. You could have 2 2,500 square foot homes within that same envelope of the building if it were designed correctly. That would perhaps look the same from the outside, and so wouldn't really change the character of a single family neighborhood, and might offer, if you will, kind of a micro condominium within a single family context that isn't any different from the types of products that you're seeing come online, but would be more affordable for families of lower incomes, and kind of promote the a different economic group that's currently priced out of the single family neighborhoods to be able to live there.
You had a question, please.
Hi, my name's Michael Thomas. I wish the screens were still on, because I'd like to refer to the Arlington County vision statement that was Russel's first slide. Arlington values diversity. One of the ways that we value diversity is geographic distribution of our affordable housing. I've had a lot of conversations about housing with people in the last year, and it's pretty much universal in any context, regardless of people's opinions about how we do affordable housing. They think geographic distribution is a good thing, and affordable housing should not be concentrated in certain parts of the county. That, in fact, has actually been official policy for many years. So here's my question. The Affordable Housing Study a few months ago had a paragraph or a section about geographic distribution of affordable housing. That's been removed and replaced with a section saying that affordable housing should be concentrated on transit corridors. So I'm wondering how you think the reaction to this change is going to be from the public that values diversity in our community, and from the county board that has told us previously that it's been surprised and blindsided by proposals from the staff.
Thank you. Certainly we've struggled with this issue, and I think the county has been very forward-thinking in their land use planning, and where multifamily housing is allowed is pretty much aligns well with our transportation corridors, and that's where we will continue to be building multifamily housing, which is for affordable housing. It is necessarily multifamily housing. It is generally a valued concept to have that distributed throughout the county to the extent feasible. and I don't think there's any disagreement with that. But there's also adopted plans that establish targets for affordable housing within certain areas, and I think as part of the way to increase that distribution in the county is as areas are planned, be it through area plans, form-based codes, sector plans, that affordable housing has to be a component of each of those plans in order to guarantee that throughout the county, along our transit corridors, we have affordable housing everywhere.
I know I had to go through my slides really quickly, but to answer your question, I think part of it is that we have to think about affordable housing and some density of it looking different perhaps in different neighborhoods. And that one slide I put up, that what could a single family neighborhood look like, a block where you would have you'd have some housing over a garage, or you'd have an accessory dwelling unit that looks different than the ones we have right now. Or the type of house that Andrew was describing, that Russell was describing, that I've seen pictures of. There was some town, I was talking to somebody in Pennsylvania, and they had an issue with a large senior population, and they needed caregivers. So they changed their ordinance, and they have these homes that from the street look like a McMansion. But what they really are 3 or 4 units, including a couple units for the senior couple, let's say, and then a smaller unit for the caregiver. We can do things like that if we have the political will. I also want to bring to your attention, if you're not already aware, of the Lee Highway Alliance. This is a visioning process that has been driven by a lot of people, but especially a couple fabulous women with whom I've been doing some work. And they have taken a very long-term and deliberative process and have involved as many of the civic associations that have a Lee Highway nexus as want to be involved. And we're talking from basically the RAPS area, North Roslyn, all the way out to the county line. An education process. What do we want our Lee High, what do they want, I don't live on Lee High, their corridor to look like, including where would it make sense on Lee Highway to put some pockets of good spaces, some density. There are a few along there right now, but so there's this very deliberate process to bring some more walkable, urban, including affordable housing and market housing to the Lee Highway corridor. It's my understanding that they're going to start a big charrette process in the spring. So that's a part of the county that right now one could say is maybe underrepresented in terms of the number of affordable units. But it's a potential, and what's really cool about this is a citizen-driven process. So if you are part of a civic association that's along the Lee Highway corridor, and you care about these issues, and you want to be able to walk in your neighborhood and age, quite frankly, in your community, I would really recommend this group to you. It's LeeHighwayAlliance.com, and the county has a dedicated webpage as well.
So I just wanted one other piece of information into the mix. I do think that there is the need to balance different objectives that the county has. I think the transportation objectives have been very successfully implemented, and we've seen the results of that, being able to urbanize and yet not end up with gridlock like we see across the river of the district. One of the issues is one of cost. APA is putting a project into place, and they have caps on how much they can spend. I believe it's $380,000 per unit for your land, your design, all your costs that it take to put this product into place, and hand the keys over to a renter. When you talk about going into lower density areas, land in Arlington is expensive. If you look at the chart over there, condos 172% increase in cost over the last 12 years. But single-family homes are 146%. Those costs are too aggressive to be able to do single-family, lower-density developments and provide the level of service to the affordable community. But it also means that we're not putting more cars on the road, and it means that they have access to the really excellent transportation networks that they need. So I agree with you that to the extent that we can be as diverse in having mixed incomes across the entirety of the county, sure, let's do it, but there are just some practical realities that we're faced with. At least that would be the way, and I'm not speaking for the county, that's just something that I can imagine is probably part of the consideration.
I'd like to thank all three panel members. Please give them a hand.